This morning, I was reading about Tamar in the book of Second Samuel, and the book talks about in Second Samuel 13. It talks about the rape of Tamar, and Tamar was David's daughter, and I guess she was full sister to Absalom. So I guess they shared the same mother and father, and then they must have had a half brother who was through, I guess, another wife of David named Amnon. And Amnon desired Tamar. He was attracted to her. He desired her, even though she was his sister. And so he pretty much allowed, he conspired to, get her into his room, playing that he was sick, asking his father if she can come and feed him. And, when she did, he began to, approach her, and she rejected it. He proceeded to rape her. And then all the love and admiration and desire that he had for her immediately went away, and it just turned into hate. And that kind of just disturbed me because it just made me think of how easily relationships change. Not that they were in a relationship, but this is what it brought me to. I guess it made me think back on my own personal experiences growing up, how, people will show interest in you, for one reason or another. And then it's like, soon as you give in, soon as you give it up, whatever the nature of your relationship is, how they will change on you. They will hurt you, they will leave you and just leave you out there and leave you to deal with, the hurt and the shame of what it is that they did to you. And so, um, Tamar's full brother Absalom, when he found out what he did to his, what was done to his sister, I mean, it upset him. He took her in, he did the best that he could do. I'm sure he couldn't take away the shame that she had, but, he took what happened to his sister very personally. And one of the things that struck me is that David found out about what happened to Tamar as well. Now remember, these are his children, his son and his daughter. And so I don't know if, because, the offender is his child just as well as the victim in this case, I don't know if he felt like he didn't know what he could do. But the thing is that he did absolutely nothing. And one thing that David must have left out of his thoughts and his lack of response is not just about the fact that the victim and the offender were both his children, and he may have not known how to respond, but just the effect that this would have on the rest of the family, because just because you find yourself in a position to where you don't know how to respond doesn't mean that you can just not respond, because you don't know what the effects are on other people, and then you don't know what your lack of response is going to look like to the other people that were affected. So as a result, Absalom obviously couldn't get over this. He waited 2 years before he plotted his revenge against, we definitely have to consider, other people, how the actions, that we take or we don't take affect someone else. I mean, it could be really detrimental if we don't. So, like I was saying, so after 2 years of waiting to see what was going to be done, or waiting around while nothing was done, Absalom never got over this. Obviously he just never got over it. And so he had invited, David and his brothers to a feast at his home. And, David didn't go, but the long and short of it is that he sent his sons. And that was the night that Absalom, 2 years later, sought his revenge, and he killed Amnon, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but he killed his brother, the one that defiled his sister. And so, as the story goes, when the message got back to David, David was actually told that all of his sons were killed. That wasn't the case, thank God, but that's what he was told, that all of them were killed. And I just see that as being like a little glimpse into the reality of how bad this could have turned out. This could have been just that bad, because Absalom could have really killed all of his children. I mean, he just could have done that, but he didn't. He just, got the revenge on the one, and the other brothers had fled. So then, moving on to, the following chapters, it had been some time before David actually had a chance to even see his son again. I mean, he called for him to move closer, but it had been a while since he was able to see his son, even though he longed for him. And then, Absalom had longed for David too. So finally, they would come together again. But now, however many years have passed, and when they came together again, by this point, Absalom was rebelling against David. I mean, he was rebelling against him. And, this for me is kind of just more go into how we respond, or our lack of response to situations, and how they just affect people, and how, based on the way that we respond to something, how we could either prevent a bad outcome from happening. And I don't know how this goes. I cannot say what David could have or could not have done. But one thing that I know is a lot of people, and especially, I'm not going to single out a gender here, but a lot of people would tend to take the path of least resistance, okay? When it comes to some things, they don't want to make waves, they just want to let things ride out. I'll deal with it. And, I never like that. I think that things warrant a response. I mean, you have to be very careful in the way that you respond, or at least, even if you're not responding, acknowledge what it is that's going on. But to ignore a situation and act like it just never existed, that's a real dangerous place to be in my opinion. I mean, it's just a real dangerous place, and it's obviously not a game to play. And so, when I think about situations that I've been in, and I think about the lack of response, because even though Tamar was a woman, and, the women weren't as mentioned as much in the Bible as the men. So I'm not really sure why at this particular point, or in these couple of years immediately after her rape, was Tamar not mentioned. But I will say that, this wasn't about her. It wasn't about what happened to her. She's not even the one who responded. And it's not like women didn't respond back then. She just didn't respond according to the story. So you would think that, the person who assaulted her, Amnon, and her father, who could so-called be responsible for at least responding to the incident, you would think that Tamar herself would have been the one to respond, but she wasn't. And it just made me think about situations in my own life where things have happened to me and I wanted to respond, or, even if I didn't want to respond or did want to respond, maybe it was not up to me to respond to the situation. And this made me see that just because something happened to you in some situations is really not about you responding. And the thing is that the person who's responsible for, I guess, giving attention to the situation shouldn't necessarily be concerned about the person that it happened to, but the people around the person that it happened to who was affected, because really that was where David made his error. Right then and there. See, I don't know why, I don't know what David was thinking. And I just want to say, simply it could be these were both his children and he didn't know how to respond. I'll just give him that. And the only reason why I'm going to give him that is because as a parent, what do you do? What do you do? I remember when I worked in a prison and I was doing a home plan for a guy who had been in prison for a while, and he was in there for murder. And he was in there for murdering his brother. And when I had to call to verify his home plan, I'm calling to his parents. And the thing about it is, think about it. I'm like, wow, they're going to let him come and live with them. But at the end of the day, they are parents to both the victim and the offender. I don't know what that felt like to them. But maybe they felt like they couldn't choose one or the, over the other. I don't know what the cause for the murder was. There was so many things that came into play. But at the end of the day, the offender was still their child. And, that's all I can go with. And I can't give an opinion on how a person is responding. But I will say that even in, let's say, workplace situations, I remember having an issue many years ago with a coworker of mine. And I remember, looking to my supervisor for some kind of assistance, and my supervisor wouldn't help. And he just said, we're like a family here, and sometimes families have issues. And I really thought that that was a weak response, and it really made me lose respect for my supervisor in that particular area. But who knows? Maybe he didn't know how to respond, especially when he's put in the place of having to choose between two of your own. But you have to always consider the other people that is involved, because that is what I believe this story right here is really talking to. It's talking to the fact that this was no longer, this happened between Amnon and Tamar, but it really got bad between Absalom and David. And not only that, think about how the other brothers must have felt. Because number one, they had to watch their other brother get murdered, and then they fled, I'm sure, in fear. And then now they had to live without the other brother. So this was something that definitely affected more than the two people involved. And the funny thing is that the two immediate people that were involved, they're not even in the story anymore. One is dead, and he's probably dead because of his, the lack of response by David. Who knows, But the other one, is not, she's not being spoken of. But it's just, it just goes to just make me think like David. The way your son came and the way that your son rebelled against you and, to tear down your kingdom is like David. Was it all worth your lack of response? And how many of us are Davids in those areas? How many people just sit back and we just don't do anything? And I think we need to, I'm not saying to rush into anything. I'm not saying to rush into a response. I'm not really telling anybody what to do. When this message came to me, it was really just a consideration. It was a consideration. And I think in my own personal life, as I'm, in the post phase of something that I have went through at work, and I sit back and I know there have been so many times where I've sat back and felt like nobody responded, no one did anything, no one, and that was the thoughts of a lot of people that was around me, well, where are the people that know you? No one could have spoken up for you, and even someone who was close to me said that the question was asked of her, well, what happened to me? Is it true that I quit, was what the person said. And she said no, she resigned. And the reason this person gave was she resigned because she wasn't being heard. And that was the perception. And so for somebody else to look at my situation and see, well, that person wasn't being heard, that person lost their voice, no one stood up, no one defended. that affects other people. It does. It affects other people. So I guess in this is not so much of a tell you what to do. I know what I got from the situation, but I would say that maybe, does this challenge you in any kind of way to consider the things in your life and what it is that you're saying or what you're not saying, or how you can sit back and watch a situation go from bad to worse because not only of your response, but your lack of response. And it's funny because as I'm even speaking about this now, is bringing me back to a situation that a friend of mine had in their marriage, and things really wasn't going well, and a lot of what was making it worse was the response that this friend of mine was actually giving to his wife. I would sit back and I would listen, and it's not a whole lot that I could say, but as a female, I can understand where his wife was, because like, as his friend, and knowing his heart and knowing his reason, because he takes the time out to explain to me what it is that he's saying, I get that. But all his wife is receiving is the response. And when he tells me what he has said to her, I can understand exactly where she is, because I know how that response might be perceived by a female. And I have shared on many occasions, you really need to respond, or you really need to respond more clearly, or you need to address certain things as they come up. And I have said plenty of times, if you don't respond, you are really leaving that person to think of the worst things possible. And you don't really want to leave room for that kind of error. And I've seen the marriage kind of go downhill. And it's not that I believe that they don't love each other or that they don't need to be with each other, but really it's all in the response. It really is. It's all in the response. It's all in the response. And we really need to consider the way that we are responding to things, because it's not just about the initial actions that were taken that necessarily makes the situation as bad as it is or as bad as it can get. But it is all in the way that we respond that could have a tremendous effect on how bad this thing can get. And so I just would encourage anybody right now to, when you find yourself faced with something, to really, really pray and ask the Lord to clearly show you how you are to respond, or if you're going to respond. And when you do have that in you to say, yes, you need to respond, you have to respond, this is how you respond, that you do respond. Because as we see here, it can be very, very unhealthy for all people concerned when there is a lack of response. So that's all I have on that matter. So I will leave it at that. I pray that you have a very blessed day.